But why does America put the interests of a foreign country first, and particularly when their interests are exactly the opposite of the interests of the American people? Back to Mark Dubowitz. He doesn't care that Al Qaeda killed 3,000 Americans on September 11th because of Israel's deadly sins. He doesn't care about that at all. If there were 100 more September 11s, if America fell because of our support for Israel, Mark Dubowitz doesn't care. He'll just make Aliyah and go live next door to Jonathan Pollard.
This was Scott Horton. Scott is a guy who spent more hours talking about American foreign policy than most DC lifers spent justifying it. Scott Horton is the guy behind the Scott Horton Show, editor-in-chief of antiwar.com, and the mind steering the Libertarian Institute. He's been doing this for over 20 years. 6,000 interviews. Can you believe it? Give or take. I mean, at this point, he probably dreams in troop deployments and think tank jargon. But here's the thing. Scott doesn't just know the game. He sees through it. He's not some academic with a grant from Raytheon, and he's definitely not auditioning for a CNN panel anytime soon. He's the guy who will name the names, trace the weapons, and connect the dots they hope you'll never notice. Scott has written some well-researched books. Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. Then Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And the latest, Provoked, where he lays out how the geniuses in Washington helped light the fuse on a new Cold War with Russia. Spoiler, it wasn't Putin waking up one day and deciding to cosplay Stalin. Now, if America's war had a soundtrack, Scott would probably title it Oops, We Did It Again. He's a dyed-in-the-wool non-interventionist. And when he talks about cutting American losses, he's not being defeatist. He's being realistic, brutally realistic. But don't mistake him for just another guy with strong opinions. Scott is sharp, he's fast, and he's funny. Dry, sardonic, and completely unafraid to swing at both neocon warmongers and the feel-good anti-war types who haven't read past the headlines. Most and foremost, Scott has done his research. So yes, we're gonna get into it. Israel, Ukraine, Iran, China, all of it. And here's the question nobody wants to ask. Can America be great again when some of its own leaders are working for a foreign country's flag? One last thing. If this reached you, it was probably by accident, because we're not only suspended on Twitter, but also shadow banned on YouTube. So if you want more of what you're not supposed to see, hit subscribe or better even, join me on Substack. It's the only way around the growing silence. Scott Horton, pleasure having you. I saw you're really busy and I'll come back to this. Thanks for taking the time. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, really. I just spent the last almost 3 hours watching your interview with with Lex Fridman and what's his name, Mark Dubowitz.
Mm-hmm.
Hallelujah. Where to start? Yeah. So initially, I wanted to talk with you about your book, Provoked, because it's an excellent book and it's in line with many of the speakers that I had on my channel, from Ambassador Chas Freeman, for example, Noam Chomsky, whatever. Yeah. So it's really in line. Yeah. But having just gone, and virtually I just stopped like 5 minutes ago, there are a couple of interesting things. Yeah? So before we start, maybe we could, we have 55 hot conflicts. We have Middle East in the news, we have Ukraine in the news, and more China. So maybe we could, maybe I will stretch my luck here, but maybe we could kind of, cover all of it a little bit. And on that note, where would you like to start?
Oh, well, whatever, man. You drive. If you want to talk about the Iran debate there, then that's okay. The first thing I would say about it is that Lex spared you an hour by deleting an hour out of that conversation. You might have noticed at the end he left in Dubowitz saying, "Oh, the
Yes.
Jews," and putting those words in my mouth twice, and he completely deleted my response to that, which was an hour of me thrashing Mark Dubowitz, the Israeli agent liar, into
Yeah.
the ground. And Lex
Yeah.
Fridman censored all of that, so you couldn't see me destroy Dubowitz on the entire question of
Yeah.
the neoconservatives and their treachery and loyalty to Israel instead of the United States of America, just like Mark Dubowitz. And you'll notice how Lex tried to attack me for saying that Dubowitz wasn't a patriotic American because he's not even from here. And he moves to this country, and his entire agenda is to get this country to go to war for another country. He's a foreign agent. He's an enemy of the United States. And I only wish that I had began the thing by saying, no, we're not friends. No, we're not going to have a polite conversation. This guy is my enemy and he's your enemy. And I'm here to debunk his lies. He's going to lie for 5 hours and then I'm going to debunk his lies for 5 hours. So go ahead, you lying piece of shit, and start with your lies. And then we'd have just got the whole thing off on the right foot from the beginning. Because of course that is how the whole show went. He would lie and lie and lie and lie, and then I would sit there and explain why everything he said is not true, and so therefore his conclusions are also stupid. And then we go on and on and on. But then when it came to who are the neocons and why did they lie us into war for Israel, Lex Fridman couldn't stand that, so he censored it like Barack Obama and just deleted it from the discussion.
A couple of things. So what I noticed is at least the last hour that I watched, it was basically only Mark talking. So I was already suspicious. Something, where's you? Where were you the last hour? So I knew there was something fishy.
Yeah.
And then you said it already when you mentioned, and you mentioned it only once, that Mark and then Lex immediately reflected this on himself are not from the US. That was a very sensitive topic because Lex went back to it twice. Even an hour later, he came back another time on that. But very
Look,
briefly.
and I said to him then, there are plenty of immigrants to America who are perfectly patriotic, but I just take them on a one at a time basis. A lot of times immigrants are more patriotic than regular Americans who just take all this stuff for granted, right? I know immigrants who fly the American flag, the only one on their block, the only one to have ever read the Constitution, the only one to care at all about what George Washington thought or the form of our government should be like, or any of these things, right? So that much is true. But does anybody think that any of that applies to Mark Dubowitz? Mark Dubowitz is an Israeli psionim. He's here to use and abuse us. He's here to get our sons killed on behalf of a foreign country. He has no loyalty to the United States of America at all. As I called him out in that debate, you think Mark Dubowitz cares that 3,000 Americans died on September 11th, paying the price for Israel's sins in Lebanon and Palestine? No, he tried to dispute it, and then when he couldn't dispute it, because I know exactly what I'm talking about and explained exactly the cause and effect, he has changed the subject. He doesn't care that that was Israel's fault. Not that Israel did it. Israel motivated it, killing little children, which is their want, and which is what makes Israel's interest the diametric opposite of America's national interests.
You were a minority on that call because neither Mark, obviously, but also not Lex Fridman are neutral when it comes to Israel. And I'm not just saying this. I analyzed the interview that Lex Fridman had with Netanyahu. And if I say analyze, I'm a behavior analyst, and I wrote my thesis on linguistic deception markers in high-stakes business negotiations. So in that aspect, I analyzed it. It was, well, my aim was to analyze Netanyahu, of course, but then I couldn't help to, in certain segments, also to look at the Lex, and without going in any detail, it is clear, crystal clear, that Lex is pro-Israel. I'm not saying this is good or bad, yeah, but he's not neutral, he's not objective. That's crystal clear, and neither was Mark. That's why I'm saying you were in the minority here because you were constantly, you had to defend your arguments, whilst Mark basically got free airtime from Lex.
Yep. Although I will admit, and I probably should have admitted this first, that I did not do a very good job in that debate. In fact, it's funny because you can see people who don't know me are like, God, this guy's such a whiny, complainy, angry, teenager type. Ugh. But anybody who knows me, they were like, oh man, you were really cool, calm, and collected there. Because they know the real me. But I was quite literally had been traveling across the country. I was on 4 hours sleep and no food. And then they moved the interview to earlier in the morning. So I didn't have time to eat. And I set my alarm for 8, but I just woke up at 6 anyway, after going to bed at 2 o'clock. And so I just was, and I hate Mark Dubowitz. I've always hated Mark Dubowitz. I've always wanted horrible things to happen to Mark Dubowitz, especially to his mouth. So he'll shut the hell up with his lies. But so I couldn't like pretend to be a real grown adult man and just deal with it as like a friendly debate as Lex tried to frame it, because it is more like I am particularly cranky right now, and I've always hated this guy, and he's a damned liar. And so it just turned into a fight, and I came out looking, I think, like, whatever, immature compared to him, because he gets to go, oh well, you're so upset, but I'm a reasonable gentleman, and kind of strike um that line of like behavior or whatever, as opposed to mine. So like if you watch it with on mute, you would think he's the adult in the room and I'm the one who's upset, kind of. You know what I mean? So just like the visual presentation of the thing, and the audio too, is not what I would have preferred. It would have been better if, one, if I had declared that no, this is not a friendly discussion, this is a fight because he's a damn liar. But also if I had said that really cool, calm, and collected, and slowly and chill.
Next
Mark
time.
Dubowitz, of course, is a liar, and everything that he says is a lie, and we're going to spend the next few hours debunking his lies, but just without raising my voice and making it seem like, you know what I mean? Because I think I really, nothing he said was true. I completely destroyed him on every single fact. And yet the debate was probably a draw anyway, just because of my performance. So I take responsibility for that part. The same thing happened when I debated Neil Ferguson. I also absolutely despise Neil Ferguson. He's the one who killed all those Iraqis. And so when I debated him, he goes, oh, look at me. I'm a snooty British gentleman with my snooty British professor tone of voice. And then he talks so slow. Oh, my argument is that, and he's just running out the clock on me. And he's got the moderator of the debate also worked with him at the Hoover Institution. So it was, if you think Lex and Mark Dubowitz was 2-on-1, this guy Peter Robinson that narrated or moderated the debate with Neil Ferguson, he interrupted me after I made just my first point. Like, he asked me what my argument was. I made one point and he stopped me. And then the whole rest of the thing was like that. And so again, I lost my cool and just, you know, started interrupting and getting angry when, again, Neil Ferguson doesn't have a leg to stand on. I completely destroyed him when it comes to the facts. If you read the transcript, I destroy. But if you watch the video, he got to play like the bigger man or whatever. So that's my own fault, basically, for just hating these people too much and still living in 2002. You know?
Not sure if it makes you feel better, but you're not the only one who's get interrupted on stage. Even Professor Jeffrey Sachs got interrupted. He told me when I interviewed him, and he's a total, on a grander stage. So
Right.
when you get close to the red buttons or to the sensitive topics, then sometimes this happens. But I have to last thing about Mark. Yeah, he's a eloquent speaker and a good presenter, same as Netanyahu. But that's the package. The content is as flawed as can be. Although I should be a bit more nuanced here, some of the things at the end especially made sense for me. Yeah? We don't need China, so we, the West, America, we don't need China, we don't need war with China, we don't need war with Russia, these kind of things. Yeah? I agree with that. I think this is what combines all of us, including Lex, including you. We don't need war, especially not another one with China, which could be catastrophic.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and on that note, I mean, look, it's been American policy for 50 years that Taiwan is part of China. Like Catalina Island is part of the United States, right? That little island off the coast of LA. Um, and so what? You know, we have no ability to protect Taiwan. There was a time where China had virtually no navy at all, and America ruled 100% of the Pacific Ocean as an American lake. But those days are over. There was a time when Mao Zedong and real Marxists ruled China and tried to destroy property and money, and 40 million people were starved to death. And so then it was the Americans who convinced them, listen, guys, Marxism is stupid. You have to stop this. You need property and you need prices and you need markets, as Chinese civilization has always known, you dummies. And so they said, okay, good. And then the right wing of the Communist Party took over, Chou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping, and they moved China toward capitalism. Now it's still a one-party state with a red flag, of course. They didn't have like a full revolution or collapse the way it had happened in the Soviet Union. But it was essentially the Americans who convinced them to get rich is glorious. Well, that means that now they can afford a navy. And the fact remains that the Pacific Ocean is 7,000 miles wide. And, we have our stations at Guam and Hawaii and whatever, but San Diego is actually the United States here, like continental United States. And we don't have the equipment at Guam or Hawaii to resupply a naval, and Hawaii's too far anyway. But any of those, South Pacific bases, we don't have the kind of supplies there that you would need to back an entire naval operation to liberate Taiwan or to prevent a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And they've run these war games over and over and over again. If we have a full pitch conventional war with China over Taiwan, we will lose ships and we will lose planes in the thousands. We'll have airmen and aviators falling out of the sky. We will have sailors drowning at the bottom of the sea, and we'll lose Taiwan anyway. And if it came down to it, then it would turn to nukes. And then we could all be dead and lose Taiwan anyway. And quite frankly, like, no offense to any individual human Taiwanese person, but who cares about Taiwan? I don't. They go, oh, what about the microchips? Well, pick up the factory and move it to Austin. We already have advanced micro devices here anyway. We can make chips here. Why did you put the chip factory on Taiwan if you knew that it was going to be such a problem? Move it to Tokyo. This whole idea that China is going to, they're going to take Taiwan, then they're going to come like the remake of Red Dawn, then they're going to come for South Korea, and then they're going to come for Tokyo, for Japan, then they're going to go to Australia, and next thing you know, there's going to be a beachhead in California. Give me a break, man. Taiwan, again, has been recognized as part of China for 50 years. So what America should do is we should help facilitate the reuniting of Taiwan and China so as to preclude fighting. The deal's already done anyway. And it wouldn't make much difference anyway in the way that the Taiwanese people live. And even if it did, I don't care about that. It's just absolutely outside of my jurisdiction or yours to do anything about that. I mean, the U.S. Constitution gives our national government the right to be the security force to protect the states in the Union and whatever territories they steal or whatever, but to protect a territory of another sovereign nation on the other side of the planet? No, the Constitution does not authorize that. It is absolutely none of our national government's business. I mean, hell, at least Kuwait was supposedly a sovereign little mini state down there when Iraq crossed an international border, but this is much more like, we're going to protect Kosovo from Serbia. Yeah, well, we have no right to. Kosovo is part of Serbia, just as Taiwan is part of China. And you see what happens when they set the Kosovo precedent in Europe. Putin said, well, you can do it in Kosovo. I can do it in Ukraine. How do you like that? So what they're doing is they're tearing up their own stupid world order in order to cheat and have their way. But it's just like when a cop gets away with murder and a cop gets away with running a red light right in front of you over and over again. It turns out people just stop believing there's such a thing as the rule of law at all. Apparently there's not. It's just the will to power, and these men can do whatever they want. And if that's really the rules of the road, a lot of things are going to change. And for them too, they're going to find out that they're actually not the strongest thugs in this country either when it comes down to it. If that's all we're going by here,
I sense the emotions, and I sensed it also in Lex's interview and in some of the other interviews that I watched that you gave.
Which just coffee. That's the problem.
Same here. Yeah. About China, I just published a executive brief.
I need to start smoking cigarettes again.
Don't do it. Yeah. I just published an executive brief about America's preparation for war with China, and through some means it came into the hands of the former foreign minister of Malta, and he was quite concerned because even for me as an investigator, I was not aware how far the actual factual preparations in regards to war with China have already advanced. This is way beyond deterrence or isolation or whatever, or peace through strength. as a linguist, I want to vomit if I hear some idiot saying peace through strength, because that's not possible. What they mean is peace through war, through aggression. This is what they actually mean, through the threat of war and aggression.
Yep.
But again, it's a 10,000 word expose, but it details also for me. I mean, I don't know all this stuff. It was quite sobering to see that we are that close to a hot war with China, and that's in addition to the Middle East and to Russia. Or maybe, and that's a question for you, or maybe is it because we have those two conflicts that Trump wants now direct all his efforts to China? Could there be a correlation? That's actually the question.
Well, yeah, I mean, the problem is just no. The doctrine is global hegemony. We get what we want, and our word is law where we go. That was George Bush Sr. said. What we say goes. That's the world law. And so, if we have a policy in China, then we'll enforce it with fire. Same as everywhere. And so, what's funny about this, and I'd really like to read your thing. Please send it to me. I think I've noticed this for really, I guess it's been like this whole century long, maybe especially since the Obama years. They talk a lot about potentially fighting Russia and or China with
Already,
conventional weapons.
sorry.
Yeah.
Already at the Cuban crisis, and we know this because Nixon was not the only American president who taped the one who recorded in the White House. Kennedy did too, and we knew that Kennedy had his hands full to avoid his hawks preemptively bombing China and also Russia and China during the Cuba crisis. And I'm pretty sure, and I've discussed this with some other people, I'm pretty sure you have similar discussions today, preemptively striking both Russia and China.
Yeah. Well, and this was, we know this was the thing from Daniel Ellsberg's book, The Doomsday Machine. And I talked to him about this, that when Kennedy came into power, the standard war plan was if a car backfires in West Berlin, America nukes every city in the Soviet Union and China. And so that would have included then the republics too, right? Not, I don't know if that included the whole Warsaw Pact, but it would have included not just Russia, but Ukraine and Belarus and the Baltics and the stands, other than Afghanistan, the rest of the stands were all members of the Soviet Union there in Central Asia and China too. And there was, like they explained, well, look, if America and Russia are both going to be completely wiped off the face of the earth, and Europe too, in a nuclear war, well, then we'll be damned if we're going to leave the earth to those Chicoms. So we got to kill them too, to prevent them from ruling what's left of the earth after we turn the northern hemisphere into one big radioactive crater.
It's crazy.
And it's completely insane. This is completely insane. But the thing is, if you look at the war plans as the think tanks discuss them now, and as like the Naval War College and all this, they put out all these studies. They'll put out a whole study about what it would be like to fight China, and the word nuclear isn't even in there. They'll act like nuclear weapons have been uninvented and do not exist. And that, you know what we could do? We could have a really fun war with China, man. Have you ever seen the footage of World War II in the Pacific? Dive bombing and kamikaze and bombing the thing and oh man, and sinking ships. What fun. That's what war is supposed to be like. Man, we could have an awesome naval battle with China. Planes and ships and zoom, zoom. But no even question, no thought. Don't even entertain the slightest possibility that, oh, we could lose New York and Washington and Denver and Houston and Los Angeles and San Francisco. They have 600 hydrogen bombs. They could erase our civilization off the face of the earth in one day. We would all be dead. There'd be nothing left, but you'd wish you had died in the initial assault if you have lived through that. Now, so, oh, well, Russia has 1,500 ready to go and another 6,000 in reserve, another 5,000 in reserve. Well, that's a lot more. But you know what? 600 will do you.
I don't think you need that many. Yeah.
What the hell? So, in other words, no, we cannot fight China under any circumstances, even if they take Japan. F Japan, dude. I'm not trading Austin, Texas for Tokyo. That sounds like a Japan problem. You're telling me I gotta die for a part of China that America officially recognized as part of China 50 years ago?
You're mentioning now Taiwan, not Japan. Taiwan.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't even care about Japan, but you're telling me I gotta
Mm,
die in a war for Taiwan?
mm.
That's preposterous. And and you're right about the peace through strength thing, right? This is the only way that they can think. They all claim, oh, they're geniuses with 200 IQs and all their fancy University of Chicago game theory, programs and whatever. They always go, oh, well, the calculus is. They can't do calculus. These people are talking in pre-algebra at best. Oh, you know what we'll do? We'll just build up a big naval force, and then they won't try it. Oh, yeah? Well, what if they do then? And they call your bluff. Now we're at war. And then when we fail, then what? You going to come home and say you're sorry that you got thousands of sailors drowned? That you got thousands of aviators knocked out of the sky? Or are you going to start dropping H bombs?
You mentioned before there were actually war games played. It's in my piece. Yeah. So there was one institution who did actually 24 of those tests, and in all of those, um, America at least incurred heavy losses, inclusive the loss of one or two super carriers. Now that made me think. Imagine that one supersonic rocket hits such a supercarrier and this thing sinks. Now these monsters are powered by nuclear power plants. I believe they have even two in them. Now suddenly you have an active or two active nuclear reactors off the bottom of the, let's say, South China Sea. I have no clue how deep it is, but I'm pretty sure you cannot dive down there. These nuclear reactors are built into the boat in the early stages of the boat in the hull. Everything else comes on top of it later. That means you can't just get them out. The point is that we saw in Chernobyl where we came into hairs a breadth of having water reaching the core, because then whole of Europe would have been gone. So nuclear reactors and water means highly explosive. So what happens if one of those supercarrier gets hit, and not only those, what is it, 10,000 people on board die, yeah, sink, whatever, but we have such a thing on the bottom of the sea? I mean, has anyone ever thought about how we're going to solve this problem? Because this is going to be a massive one.
Yeah. Well, there's this new book, Nuclear War, by Annie Jacobson that came out last year, where in her scenario, the North Koreans nuke an American nuclear power plant and it causes a meltdown. And then what happens is you have this molten core of um, radioactive metal that just sinks into the earth. It's so hot, it just burns straight through the topsoil and even the rock and just is going to start burrowing down into the mantle and spewing radioactive junk out of it for the next 3,000 years. And no ability for anyone to do anything about it ever. You just have, oh, well, I guess the central coast of California will have to be uninhabited now from now on. These people have very high time preferences and they are not thinking far ahead at all. And, part of it is just the economics of democratic politics. They're all in and out so quickly. They have their chance to make their mark. And then if there's a problem later, as George W. Bush said, well, Iraq, that will, what's going to happen there? That will be, have to be left for other presidents to decide. I just got us in there. You guys are going to have to solve the problem that I made because I only have 8 years to screw everything up and then I got to go. And so you see this a lot. In fact, I have a quote from Bill Clinton's guy, Strobe Talbot, where I'm going to say 2018, so in the middle of the Civil War, but before it obviously got much worse in 2022 in Ukraine there, they interviewed Strobe Talbot. The New York Times interviewed Strobe Talbot. And the guy says, basically, well, so what do you have to say for yourself, Mr. NATO expansion is a great idea and we won't have cause any problems with it. And he says, well, listen, man, when you're in charge of running a government, there's a rule that you have to follow that says that you have to do what you can in your country's national interest. And if you don't, you're not going to be in charge very long. But then he stops and he goes, Now, on the other hand, should we have had maybe a higher, wiser conception of our national interest at the time? Maybe. Right. So, in other words, what was the national interest that Strobe Talbot was actually serving by pursuing NATO expansion in the 1990s? He was pursuing Bill Clinton's reelection. is what he was pursuing. They needed Lockheed dollars and they needed Polish votes. And so they didn't care that they were scheduling a war on Ukraine, on the Ukrainian-Russian border for the year 2014 through we don't know when, because they needed to secure Bill Clinton in power for 97 through 2001. And whatever happens after that, well, that'll be up to other presidents to figure it out, right? In that same W. Bush way. And so that was it. They're gone. Why in the world would Strobe Talbot have a higher, wiser perspective on America's national interest? He's gone in 4 years. That dictates his lower, dumber conception of America's national interest. And so that was the perspective that he had. And that was why he dug us all this pit. Thanks a lot, Strobe, the Russia expert, who, by the way, knew better in the first place before changing his mind for political reasons. Right? So, meanwhile, though, you and the wife sitting across the kitchen table, well, you're not an American, but I am, whatever, and hell, in Europe too, you might think, wow, now that the Soviet Union is gone, the West's relationship with Moscow is the most important thing in the world, and now it's on a positive note, and keeping our relationship with Moscow positive is the most important thing in the world. And in fact, it's so important that actually no other things in the world rank on the same list of importance than the West and the Russians getting along. Because
You
as
would think so.
previously stipulated, I mean, then we were talking tens of thousands, but still, they have 7 and we have 7. And that's enough H-bombs to destroy all of Northern civilization permanently and to set the rest of humanity back a couple of thousand years. Right? So, and with the starvation from the nuclear winter and whatever, you'd have billions killed. Billions. You'd have a World War II worth of deaths in the first 45 minutes of a nuclear war with Russia. So on the list of things that are important, there's first place, and then the next thing on the list is in a millionth place after that. Nothing else matters, right? Nothing else matters compared to that. And then, but do they have a high, wise conception of America's national interest? No. They have a low, dumb one because they're interested in their own asses. That's it.
I mean, I'm sitting here in the Netherlands, yeah. So I'm looking at this from a European perspective, and I'm more than perplexed and puzzled how the current European leaders drive Europe. Now that the US made a 180-degree U-turn,
Right.
try to drive Europe into a war with Russia, but self-interest, yeah. So. Um, you said, this administration, another administration. I mean, if I look at this, nothing changes. It doesn't matter which administration, Democrats or Republicans in power. The overall geostrategic objectives of America have been the same since this, probably before the Second World War. And
Mm.
just from European to connect this again with self-interest for Europe and having a good relationship with Russia. I mean, the first NATO. I mean, this is the geostrategic nightmare of the US.
Right.
German know-how, Russian resources. The first Secretary General of NATO, Lord Ismay, said already the aim of NATO is to keep America in, Russia out, and Germany down. And this is what they're still pursuing. This is
Yep.
simple as that. Case in point, Nord Stream. Please tell me.
Yeah. Well, so this is the whole concept was Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin had a concept that they called the Eurasian home, which was going to be a closer economic relationship, not a military alliance, of course, but a closer economic relationship between Germany and Russia. And as you say, this has been at the core of first British and American foreign policy for a century. That whatever, man, Halford Mackinder one day said that, geez, we just can't have that. And so that has become the iron law of the universe dictated by London, and that we have to, continue to abide by forever, I guess, that we just cannot stand for Germany to be the dominant power in Europe. That's why we have to be there so that we are the dominant power in Europe, not them. Now, there's plenty of historical reasons for smaller neighbors to be worried about the Germans potentially. However, the era of totalitarianism is over, right? It's not like we're worried about Hitler and Stalin having a permanent totalitarian alliance in the East, where now America and Britain will never have access to any Eastern European state ever again because they're just completely dominated by these two major powers. There's no threat of that. Putin and Merkel didn't have any idea of somehow excluding the rest of the EU or the United States of America from Eastern Europe. I mean, we're doing that now, excluding the expansion of our military alliance, obviously was in, the Russians' priorities there. But Angela Merkel wasn't working to build a new German Russo superstate to dominate the world. She was just trying to essentially establish an enhanced trading relationship with Russia to disincentivize conflict. And the quote is often attributed to Bastiat, although he actually didn't say this, but he should have, that where goods do not cross borders, soldiers will. So if you look at World War I and the Central and Allied powers in that war, they had previously been two giant free trade zones that then became military alliances and went to war against each other. Well, the solution is they should have combined into one big free trade zone and then not fought, right? And so if you listen to the Hawks talk about it, they will say, oh, see, Nord Stream, which is a gas pipeline from Russia to Germany, Nord Stream is blackmail. It's control. It's slavery. This is how Russia enslaves Germany to their will, because now Germany is so dependent on their natural gas that they don't want to fight Russia, which is terrible. Except that, no, man, that's just because you guys are war hawk lunatics. That's what's good about the Nord Stream pipeline. We want to prevent conflict. We want for Germany to be too dependent on Russian gas to fight them, and we want Russia to be too dependent on German euros to fight them. And so instead of having capitalists in charge, we have statists in charge. And they look at it like any compromise, any working together here, that's the threat that we have to prevent. And so this is, George Friedman from Stratfor, who's like kind of a realist school guy. He gave a speech in 2014, 2015, where he said, this is the primordial fear of the United States and Britain, is this German-Russian alliance of any kind, and we're willing to do anything to prevent that from being permanently ensconced there, and including building this new cordon sanitaire around Russia, and that's what taking Ukraine away from Russia is part of that, ruining Merkel's ability to continue this thing in a way that was beneficial to Germany and Russia at potentially the exclusion of the United States. And then there are two major things about the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. The first one is that there are two pipelines, which is actually four pipelines, but one is two and two is two more. And the Russians had already turned off Nord Stream 1 in retaliation for, I forget exactly what specifically, but it was just before the war, I believe in the end of 2021.
And that one is still intact. One is still intact. Right. They could switch it on.
They just turned that off themselves. And then it was the Americans, obviously, who bombed Nord Stream 2, or, pretty obviously. There are conflicting stories here, but sure as hell wasn't the Russians. Seymour Hersh says Joe Biden did it. The Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and others say that it was Ukrainians, working obviously under American direction, although the American
on this yard where they supposedly found the explosive residues of explosives on the kitchen table, as if they would prepare, last minute, a bomb on the kitchen table. I mean, how idiotic is this?
So James Bamford is a great reporter, and
I interviewed him. Yes, I interviewed him twice.
Based on open source documentation, he concluded that they did it with drones, with submarine, remote controlled submarine robots. Went down there and did it. So I don't know. But what's really funny about that is, well, I mean, first of all, this is an act of war by one NATO nation against another, whether Ukraine did it or the United States did. It was an act of war against Germany. So we're just, as they told the Washington Post, we don't want to know. It's like who killed the uncle or whatever. Like somebody in the family did it. Nobody else wants to know which one it was because it's going to cause more problems. Some weird analogy like that they made. But the media, and I don't know how it was in Western Europe, but
exactly like it. Exactly the same. Yeah.
It was just insane. the way that
Putin did it, Russia did
Putin
it,
did it,
they did
Bush
it,
did it.
yeah, of
And
course.
none of them ever explained, well, why in the world would they do that? Right? None of them ever even attempted to say what his motive would be. Of course, he could turn off the pipeline with a switch, the same way he had already done to Nord Stream 1 as punishment. Blow up his own pipeline made no sense whatsoever. It's clearly Western sabotage. But I like that story because it's just such a great exercise in the control of the media and the dishonesty of the media and the contempt that our rulers have for us. Maybe this is back to my debates with those jerks, a symptom of my childishness. But when people lie to me, I take it as a personal insult. You're calling me stupid. And I'm just smart enough that I really resent that. You know what I mean? If I was a little bit smarter, I wouldn't care. But I'm just smart enough that I'm very insecure about being called stupid. And when you lie to me, you're calling me stupid. And that makes me angry. And I just can't, I don't like getting over this thing. I assume other people are the same way. That like, hey man, if they can blame the entire Oklahoma City bombing on one guy, and they can blame, they can pretend Saddam Hussein is making atom bombs, and they can pretend that the Syria war started when Bashar al-Assad decided to exterminate the population of his country. And then
Of
luckily
course.
America and Al-Qaeda, swooped in there to help defend the population from him. And they can tell you that Putin started the war in 2022 and then blew up his own pipeline. Then one, it's extraordinary to just see the level of deceit that the American government is willing to go through,
And the
to put
media.
us through and
And the
use,
media.
and the media too, and then the willingness of the people to accept it. I mean, let's never forgive Robbie Suave from Reason Magazine. Reason Magazine, which claims to be a libertarian publication, went out and said, well, obviously, Vladimir Putin did it. What do you mean, obviously? Well, he goes, every indication that I see, what indication? There are no indications. Zero. You mean you heard some lady say that on CNN?
Hmm.
And yet that level of nonsense, including Saddam Hussein's threat to world peace, can filter all the way down to Reason Magazine. They will even accept it and regurgitate these lies. They even supported Iraq War III over at Reason Magazine. A guy named Ed Koretsky wrote a piece saying, yeah, we have to go save the Yazidis who are trapped on Mount Sinjar and launch Iraq War III against the caliphate. They can just tell them anything. Just tell them anything. And I like picking on Reason Magazine because they keep interviewing me and then censoring it and not running the interviews. So get to have my
I promise,
revenge by bringing up
everything
Robbie
stays in here.
Suave.
Nothing will be cut out here. But one last thing about Nord Stream. I interviewed
Sure.
Eric Anderson. He's a former Boeing engineer. He financed and was on these expeditions twice to the actual explosion sites of Nord Stream. Yeah.
Mhm.
In my interview with him, because he gave me the pictures, it's too crazy, really. If you write a novel about this, people would say this is unbelievable. Next to the remainders of the pipelines is de facto an American Navy boot. It's still there. He found it also by his second expedition, so it's still there. Now, I'm not saying yes,
That's
I'm not saying that American divers went in there and blew it up. This is not how it happened. Yeah, it's not practical. Yeah,
somebody
but
dropped the boot overboard.
at some point in time, someone with wearing a U.S. Navy boot was there, and Eric also explained to me how you can lose it because anyway, it's all in the interview. What's more interesting is that I think it was the Swedish or the Norwegians. They removed hundreds of meters of pipeline. There are massive pieces missing. Basically, they clean up all the evidence, right? So in this interview with him, there is a 3D model because he had a sonar drone or whatever. There's a 3D model. But again, this whole story is by far not over. The crucial point here is that what people don't realize is this has not only an impact for Germany. So many people I talk to talk about the deindustrialization of Germany, but by extension, of course, also for Europe. And we're feeling it already. I don't know how well, I do know actually how the economic situation in America is, but people feel it here too. The inflation is just massive, so that this has a generational impact. And meanwhile, Russia has signed a 50-year contract with China, of course.
right? I mean, this is the whole thing is, these people never stop talking about democracy as, and popular sovereignty as the source of their legitimate authority. But the rulers of Germany and the Netherlands and the United States, they don't give a
BlackRock.
damn about us.
Merz is from BlackRock. So BlackRock, as you know, is an American company. So whose interest is the current German chancellor actually representing? Germany? Well, I strongly doubt it. I strongly
That's
doubt
right. I
it.
mean, these people, they all meet at Davos or wherever and on their Zoom calls and they decide their policies. And we have absolutely nothing to do with it at all. It's, they always call the ruling elite in Russia oligarchs. Well, isn't that entirely how the West is run as well? These massive nation states and they're very connected billionaires. That's exactly who's in charge here. And they're no less corrupt than they are in Russia. They maybe have a little bit fancier ways of going about their plunder, um, mostly just by dipping into the treasury. But they clearly they come up with these policies. You know what we'll do? We'll destroy all of Germany's nuclear power plants in the name of green energy, and then we'll import all of these hydrocarbons, fossil fuels from Russia in the name of that's greener somehow than nuclear, and then oh, we'll let the Americans blow up our pipeline from Russia. And so now energy costs will just go absolutely through the roof. We'll just strangle the German economy completely to death. The most productive people in the world, if you just let them have a decent currency and a free market. And we just put our hands around their throats. And
Yeah,
to what end?
and meanwhile, Germany, of course, buys the liquid gas from America for what,
That's
5, 6 times the price,
That's
or
right.
even
And you know
higher.
what? There's a great speech that Rand Paul gave where he goes, it's my friend Ted Cruz from Texas who's the greatest opponent of the Nord Stream pipeline. You think that's an accident? This is not free market capitalism. This is
No, you have to explain
mercantilism.
it. You have to explain it. So you are in America, you know what's in Texas, but some people might not know. So
Oh,
Texas is oil.
Texas is where that LNG, that liquefied natural gas, is coming from.
Exactly.
And so this is, purely parochial economic interest, has nothing to do with what's good for the people of Germany, Russia, and the United States for the rest of the century. It's only just about dividend checks for these corrupt Republican politicians, is all it is. Donations for them, control for them. And it's the absolute corruption of capitalism. When you have the national government intervening on behalf of favored corporations here and all over the world in this way, it completely ruins the ability of markets to compensate in any real way, right? You have a thumb on the scale so badly. So then that means if they can coerce the Germans into paying these extra high prices for Texas gas, then that means they're jacking up the price for everybody too. You know what I mean? Just because they've made the demand in Germany that high by through politics, tearing down all the nuclear power plants, blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, and giving them no choice. And so then, of course, that makes it more difficult for whatever alternative energy companies and whatever other interventions that the government is doing. So this is something that they do with the Saudis all the time. Is they'll have like fracking and shale oil and all these things in the United States when the prices are really high. But then America will work with the Saudis to ramp up production to, for example, screw the Russians, right, and try to bring the price down. And then they don't care when they're putting American corporations out of business. In the United States and Canada, where they're doing the fracking and the shale oil and the tar sands and whatever, all this more expensive oil extraction, all that capital investment into building those corporations, all that gets nuked because America has a foreign policy overseas that says we want to put pressure on the Saudis to subsidize our economy at their expense and in order to hurt some third country. And it ends up hurting our own people too.
Talking about exactly that, but hurting their own people, in this case America or Trump, making America great again. And that's my segue briefly into Israel. Yeah, I can't help to wonder. Many of the things that American leaders have done in the past are doing right now are not really in the interest of the American people. If we look into the Middle East, right? So an extended war. I mean, I think there are different layers. On a geostrategic level, I completely understand. You know, Israel is the villa in the jungle. I don't know who said it. Joe Biden, I believe, something like that. Or no, Joe Biden said Israel is America's unsinkable supercarrier in the Middle East. And the German chancellor said about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Israel does our, and I quote, Drecksarbeit. Now,
I'm sorry.
literally trans
Israel does what?
Drecksarbeit, that's a German word. So literally translated, it means dirty work, but it's not hitting the nail because the term Drecksarbeit is way more nastier than dirty work. Yeah, to hear this from a chancellor, I just couldn't believe it because it has a connotation you don't want to have in this kind of discussion. Yeah. So there is, of course, an interest for the US to have a geostrategic interest to have Israel where it is, simply to divide the Arabs, to have the carbons, so the oil under control. I understand this,
Yeah, I don't buy
but
that at
and
all. I don't see how Israel's existence serves America in any way whatsoever, other
I'm
than
not
a
saying it does. I'm just saying
relationship with everyone.
I'm
We get
agreeing with you.
nothing out of it. I think Joe
I'm ag-
Biden's a damn fool.
I'm agreeing with you, but I want to go to something very specific. So hurting American people. Yeah, there is a Israeli super spy and Hollywood billionaire still today active in America. His name is Arnon Milchan.
Mhm.
He produced films like Pretty Movie, 12 Years of Slave, all kinds of this really blockbuster
He
movies. Yeah.
produced JFK that blamed the
Yes.
assassination on everybody except Israel.
Yes. What I want to say with this is he, together with Benjamin Netanyahu, when Benjamin Netanyahu was, I believe, chief of staff in the Israeli embassy in Washington, and we know this from freedom of information. Yes, Grant Smith also. Yeah, Freedom of Information Act. Also documents obtained by the Freedom of Information Act. And I spoke with. You just mentioned his name.
Grant F. Smith.
No, it will come back to me. I interviewed him twice. We spoke about him. The Puzzle Palace. He wrote the Puzzle Palace.
Oh, James Bamford.
James Bamford. Sorry, I'm my
Yeah, yeah,
brain.
no
Yeah,
problem.
I spoke about it with him. Yeah. So these guys, they stole the secretest, the most secrets, if that makes any sense, from America, and brought them to Israel. Yeah. They had a
Including
fall guy.
nuclear triggers, the
uh,
Krytrons that they call.
Quadrons.
Mhm.
Yes, yes, yes. So Benjamin Netanyahu
By
personally
the
was
way, it was
involved.
Grant F. Smith that did that work. And I really respect James Bamford, but he plagiarized Grant and didn't give him credit.
Hmm.
So Grant gets double credit and James gets -2 for that. Not
Okay,
cool.
I actually tried to reach out to Grant, but I never really found the correct contact information or whatever. So I
I
would be
can help you
interested
with
to.
that.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
Sure.
So anyway, what I want to say with this is these are things that go against the core of American interest. Nevertheless, multiple US so multiple US administrations have covered this up till today. Till today, Arnon Milcham is a free man. I mean, not to talk about Netanyahu, it's a total different story. But yeah, so there are incidents. Not even to talk about USS Liberty. I interviewed one survivor. Yeah,
Mhm.
maybe you want to elaborate USS Liberty.
Yeah, I've interviewed a bunch of those guys. Phil Turney and Ron Kukol and a bunch of those
That's the one,
guys.
Phil Turney. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So yeah, everybody can go to my website, scotthorton.org. And if you want to look at those, I got a bunch. Just search USS Liberty there. Um, This when Israel attacked an American ship. You can give James Bamford a lot of credit for this one. In the Puzzle Palace, he has, I believe, the best chapter on this that anybody wrote. And I did a deep dive on. I never wrote about it, but I did a deep dive in preparation for an interview with him actually a couple of years ago, where I watched I don't know 4 or 5 documentaries and read 2 or 3 books about it. I I um, and I decide I think Bamford's treatment is the best. There are people who say it was all a false flag attack to get America to attack Cairo, even with nukes and all of this kind of stuff. I don't believe that that's true. I think Bamford had the more plausible explanation, which was they were covering up the massacre of hundreds of Egyptian POWs in the Sinai. And they didn't want the Americans to see what they were doing because they thought that the Americans would call a premature halt to the war when they still wanted to move on the Golan. And so when they were massacring all these prisoners, they decided to attack the ship to prevent them from knowing about it. That seemed to be the most plausible explanation. But if you search my name
I put the link in the
and
description. I will put the link in the
okay,
description of the.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure this is a tweet thread I did. It could have been a blog entry, but whatever. If you search my name and search USS Liberty, argument from authority, right? That's a logical fallacy that, oh, well, the authority figure said so. Except I have a list this long of NSA, State Department, military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, the embassy, and everybody from the Secretary of State, the Director of Central Intelligence, the entire ruling cast of National Security Agency, everybody, they all said it was deliberate, every single one of them. And it's just forget about it. You want to talk about argument from authority? Yeah, I win. When I got 25 of these guys, including Richard Helms and everybody else, telling the truth about this, Stansfield Turner and all these others. So, yeah, there's just no question that it was deliberate. They're lying when they say that it wasn't deliberate. The only question was exactly what their motive was. But they killed 34 American sailors and NSA officers and wounded many more. And we're clearly
181.
trying to sink the ship and kill them all.
I think you said just the crucial thing is that wasn't just an attack. And oops, sorry, we mistaken. No, they wanted to sink it because they came back and back and back. Yeah, and Phil Turney describes it very well. The
They
second
launched
thing is
5 torpedoes, only one hit. Amazing.
airplanes,
They
torpedo
launched
boats.
5 torpedoes at the ship. So they were
Yeah,
clearly
but,
trying to kill everyone. And they
yeah.
strafed the lifeboats too. And by the way, they still have one of the lifeboats on display that they strafed full of their bullet holes at their naval museum where they brag about what they did to us there. I don't give a damn about America. I don't give a damn.
Thanks.
And look, why should they? They're another country. They're interested in their interests. If they can get America to back Al Qaeda to kill Hezbollah, good for them. But why does America put the interests of a foreign country first, and particularly when their interests
Exactly my
are
point.
exactly the opposite of the
Yeah,
interests of the
yeah,
American people? Back
yeah.
to Mark Dubowitz. He doesn't care that Al Qaeda killed 3,000 Americans on September 11th
Mm.
because of Israel's deadly sins. He doesn't care about that at all. If there were 100 more September 11s, if America fell because of our support for Israel, Mark Dubowitz doesn't care. He'll just make Aliyah and go live next door to Jonathan Pollard.
Mm.
It's the same thing for all of these Israel firsters. To support Israel is to betray the United States of America.
That's exactly true because it goes against its own interest.
That's right. Which are completely opposite of ours. And if you listen to the Hawks, they go, well, our interests in Israel's are the same. No, they're not. And you can't listen to them explain it, or they'll
Who
resort
said
to
it?
ridiculous,
I think
glittering
Mike.
generalities. They'll go, well, we're fighting the Muslims. Yeah, we're backing Al Qaeda against Hezbollah because Israel hates the Shiites more. Okay, we're doing their dirty work, not the other way around.
Die Drecksarbeit, exactly like the German chancellor said it. Yeah. I was just wondering who said it in the interview with Lex. I think it was Mark, right? That the interests of America and Israel are the same. I'm not entirely sure if I put my words in his mouth. I'm not entirely sure, but it's very fresh in my memory. Yeah,
Well, they
because
all
it's
say
not.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
they all try to pretend that that's true, but they can only do that by lying to you. They can only do that by speaking in overly broad terms to try to confuse you, right?
Mm.
As Dick Cheney said about Iraq. He goes, "Well, Iraq is, sort of the geographical area where this kind of terrorism comes out of." Huh? What are you talking about? No, there had never been a bin Ladenite suicide bomber that had ever come from Iraq before that war. What he was doing was he was calling you stupid. He was saying, hey, Americans, you don't know the difference between Iraq and Iran and Saudi and Jordan. So, you dummy, I'm going to use your son and get him killed to accomplish Israel's foreign policy goals. Idiot. That's what he was really saying, right?
I interviewed Larry Wilkerson. I'm sure you know him.
Mhm.
And he told me that, I mean, and we all know this iconic image where Colin Powell, and by the way, Larry Wilkerson was Colin Powell's chief of staff, and Colin Powell testified in front of the Senate or the UN, I'm not entirely
The
sure, where he
UN.
showed the little glass tube with white powder in. And in retrospect, of course, it's clear they don't have some highly dangerous stuff in there. But Larry Wilkerson asked me, "Do you know
Yeah, it
what
was
was
just
in
quick
this
bang.
glass?
Yes.
Salt, salt. It was salt, simple
I
kitchen
thought it was
salt.
funny
Yeah,
because he's got George Tenet behind him, the CIA
yeah,
director.
Yeah.
And I actually had I made a bumper sticker out of that. It's Colin Powell holding up the little vial, and he's got George Tenet behind him, and it says the CIA sells drugs. Colin
Now you
Powell,
have to,
hey, want to buy some crack?
yeah. But now you have to allow, maybe we could go this down there because the CIA actually did, I don't dare to say does, but did sell drugs. Maybe you want to
Oh yeah.
elaborate.
Yeah, well, so what happened was in the 1980s, the Democratic controlled Congress passed the Boland Amendment that forbid Ronald Reagan from spending money supporting the Contra um, so-called rebels against the Sandinista commie government in Nicaragua, as well as the death squads in El Salvador that were preventing the commies from overthrowing the government there. And then this was part of the Iran-Contra scandal, was they're selling all these weapons to Iran through Israel,
Illegally,
and, and then taking the proceeds and whatever profits from that and directing them to support the Contras in Nicaragua. Well, another part of that same scheme was a guy named Danilo Blandón, set up a network to sell cocaine in the United States, and particularly in Los Angeles, although also into Bill Clinton's Arkansas. I just read in the New York Times yesterday that this is a crazy conspiracy theory that people think. It was George Bush's cocaine. Vice President George Bush ran the operation, Bush Sr., and they were sending in by the thousands of tons, sending cocaine in to Los Angeles, into Arkansas, and into Miami, Florida. And they were 100% responsible for the crack epidemic of the 1980s and 90s. It just absolutely obliterated, especially poor black neighborhoods across this country. And they didn't give a damn. And the only thing that they go, oh, that's conspiracy theory, because some people said, yeah, they did this because they hate black people so much and they just wanted to hurt black people. When the reality is they did it because they hate black people so much and they don't care about black people at all or what happens to them. It's not that the point was to destroy black communities. The thing was they didn't give a damn if they destroyed black communities. They had an illegal secret war to finance. And so if the American people have to pay the price, fine. And this is how I knew how corrupt Bill Clinton was when they nominated him in 1992. I was still just a high school kid, but I already knew that Ronald Reagan was a dope pusher. And as soon as the stories started coming out about, hey, they were flying all this cocaine into Mena, Arkansas, it was all completely caught up. It was all completely surrounded in the story of Iran-Contra. That wasn't the Democrats, right? Bill Clinton was an employee of Vice President George H.W. Bush. And so when he beat him, what difference did it make? All it meant was the Democrats will be able to get NAFTA passed where George Bush couldn't. Otherwise, we're still bombing Baghdad every day. Nothing else changes. And they had been part of that same thing together. And this was a crazy conspiracy theory for years. Only some lunatic, some idiot, some leftist, or some right-wing militia kook would believe that. Except that they made a Tom Woods is a totally different dude. They made a Tom Cruise movie out of it called American Made that just came out a few years ago, where he plays Barry Seal. And what's Barry Seal's job? Flying planes full of cocaine for the CIA for sale to the American people, to be rocked up and sold to poor blacks, mostly, and transporting that stuff into the United States. So Ronald Reagan, Mr. Just Say No, the guy who gave people 35 years in the penitentiary for having a few rocks in their pocket, was the guy who put the rocks in their pocket. And that's a fact. And in fact, I'll
incredibly
tell you
cool.
one more. No, I won't, because I'm not sure if I have permission to say that.
You have
Well, I'll
permission.
tell you this. Gary Webb, the reporter who broke this story for the San Jose Mercury News, he didn't
Yeah.
get a single fact wrong, not one. He was 100% right. The
Yeah,
only
but
thing
he's
that was wrong in his reporting was something that his idiot editor said that he never said. But they made the big headline about like somehow that this was deliberately to hurt black people. And Gary Webb went through the roof and said that was not my reporting. How dare you do that? And they went, oh, whoops. And then the Washington Post, the center of evil in the world, went on a full jihad against him, citing his editor's kind of headline instead of his actual reporting, and smeared him into the ground. They got him fired from his job at the San Jose Mercury News. First, they reassigned him to the Hollywood beat, and then they fired him from the paper altogether. He resigned from the paper and he went to work as an investigator for California State Congressional Committee and killed himself at the end of 2004, shot himself in the head. And people say that he didn't because he shot himself twice, but that does happen. That, people, God, imagine shooting yourself in the mouth. People flinch and miss on the first shot, shoot out the side of their mouth or something, and then they go, okay, no, I really mean it this time, and then they do it. And everyone who knew him, people who knew him and loved him and cared about him, like Robert Perry from Consortium News, and there was this idiot, I can't remember his name. I didn't really like or respect the guy very much. And he ended up killing himself too, actually. He was one of the original 9/11 truther guys. But anyway, he was a friend of Gary Webb's, too, a very close personal friend of his, and also verified that, no, this was a suicide. The guy, they ruined his entire life. They drove him to, and the CIA, they could have killed him a long time ago. They didn't have any need to murder the guy. They had already completely won and destroyed him. But he shot himself with his dad's pistol. He had changed all of his, his house and everything over to his ex-wife's name. And then, like, I think the last straw was somebody stole his motorcycle, and he was like, that's it. And then that was it. And the people who knew him and loved him and cared about him knew that it was a suicide. And of course, a bunch of losers and scumbags and hacks and, money makers cashed in on this, claiming that he was murdered and all that, because they only care about money, not what's true, or not about his survivors and their feelings or any of that. But still, like, what's the difference between the CIA driving a guy to suicide and them killing him themselves? They're 99% responsible for him putting that gun in his mouth, because they didn't just lie and deny the truth that he revealed, but they lied about him and they smeared him and they called him a liar, and they ruined his life. And it's a really sad story. He's a good dude. I interviewed him in 2004. And I thought we were going to be friends. We're getting along so great. And it always really bothered me too that, man, '04, that was just the first year after World War II started. And the alternative media was only just kind of getting going then. But man, Robert Perry at Consortium News, that thing took off, man. Perry was a great one. And Gary could have come and written for him. Gary could have been one of the best guys during the terror war years. He was just whatever, a slightly left-leaning investigative reporter. He'd have been great. He'd have been great, and he'd have got back on his horse. He'd have been fine if he'd just been able to hold on one more year. You know what I mean? It was really a sad story. And why they destroy him? Because he told the truth about how much they absolutely despise us. They don't care about us at all, man. There's this drug war documentary. I'll never forget this thing. It's Kevin Booth, who was Bill Hicks's best friend. Kevin Booth did this documentary about the war on drugs. And he goes and he's at the fence of this penitentiary, and there's all these black guys, and they're in Southern California. And there's all these black guys at the gate, and they're all yelling and yelling and yelling. Well, look at me. And then one guy's voice kind of rises above the din, and they all kind of be quiet and let this one guy talk. And he says to the camera, he goes, listen, I'm doing 35 years because I got busted with a few rocks in my pocket. Does that sound fair to you? He was 17, 18 years old or something when they got him. They gave him essentially life in prison for having a little bit of Ronald Reagan's cocaine in his pocket.
It's big business in America. I heard it's privatized. Yeah. But
Yeah.
speaking about people who pay a heavy price for speaking out, I seriously have a whole list of guests on my channel who suffered the consequences, but which leads me to ask you. I mean, you're pretty outspoken, I have to say. And if you allow me, you remind me in a number of respects on Emeritus Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. I don't know if you know him. He's in the US. He spits fire. He's against Zionism. He's a rabbi, yeah, but he's absolutely falikant against Zionism. Yeah. But also with the beard, white beard, and so the way you express yourself, this emotional, reminds me a little bit about him. But
And
talking
I'm sorry,
about
his last name was?
Emeritus Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. I can send you.
Oh,
I can send you the link.
I know a guy named Yaakov Hirsch who talks mad shit too.
Uh,
That's kind of,
I wouldn't say that he's talking mad shit, yeah, but fiery, yeah.
yeah,
But
that's all I meant.
suffering consequences for speaking out. And now you are quite outspoken. I knew this before I even invited you. Before I hand it to you. So in my last interview with him, coming back to Larry Wilkerson, he only said to me in a half joke, it was a half joke, that he sleeps with a gun under his bed. He says, I think his widow, yeah, his daughter is out of the house, and he thinks it's either the Mossad or a hit him from Ukraine that he's afraid of, sleeping with a gun under his pillow. Suffering consequences for speaking out. Is that anything that you experienced?
No. I mean, if I if I wasn't good on everything and I just wanted to have a career being on the radio, then I'd just be a Zionist and I would just be a talk radio guy. Um, so, the idea, I mean, and that is really what my ideal would be, the afternoon drive time radio, even though those days are gone, but that's just what I love. Um, but I know that there's no real radio station in the country, no commercial radio station in the country that would ever hire me because of the Israel issue. So you could talk about like precluded paths or stuff like that. As far as being in danger, well, let me tell you this. I'm a Texan and I'm a libertarian. So you can come up with your own conclusions about what that means about firearms on my property and what might happen to somebody were they to criminally trespass.
Yeah, I didn't really mean physically in that literal sense, but
Yeah.
from smear campaigns, Wikipedia, which is totally, biased. ChatGPT, I made a piece. ChatGPT is absolutely Israel biased. Yeah, I have a piece. I can show
Yeah.
you. As a behavior analyst, I lead ChatGPT to the tunnel of truth, where it says, no, 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 maybe, oh yes. Yeah, so I ask specific question. Did Israel do that? Like I think one of the question was, did the Haganah, the precursor of the ideas, ever poison water wells? And no, 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 no. Maybe, yes. So
Right.
it's absolutely Israel biased. So it can come. These kind of things can come in multiple forms. But I'm glad to hear that you are more or less safe and sound. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. As I was brought up in the little d democratic tradition that we can disagree about these things without murdering each other over them.
Mm.
Now, if somebody from the Jewish Defense League or the Ukrainian neo-Nazi parties want to come and try it, then while I don't invite them, I don't welcome them to try it, I would warn them that they better not, because they'll find that they're quickly dying from holes in their body.
That sounds funny for me living in the Netherlands because you cannot get the single. Well, that's not true. Of course, illegally you can get guns left and right. Yeah, but you can't. But
Isn't that
for
an
me,
important point? You hear that, everybody? Black markets exist. Guns are
it,
available everywhere, regardless of what the law says. So you might as well go ahead and get one because the criminals don't obey the law and they've got guns. So how are you going to win a shootout if you don't have a gun?
I refrain from commenting on the gun issue, but I would like to share an observation. So my channel focuses mainly on two topics: Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, and now a little bit more on China. And this I'll come back to you in a moment because you're one of those candidates. Now, the challenge that I face more frequently is that I have an interesting speaker who is a subject matter expert on one of those areas. And then, of course, they ask me, okay, what's your channel? Show me, blah, blah, blah. And I show them. And the last one, like 3 days ago, came back to me and said, yeah, well, I cannot join your channel because we are not eye to eye on Israel. So what I want to say with this is I have people who are really very lucid and knowledgeable about, let's say, Israel and Palestine, and are completely flawed on Ukraine,
Yeah.
or the other way around.
Right.
So you are one of those. I mean, I have most of the people that are on my channel kind of are lucid in both areas, but that's not the rule, right? Someone who
It's a
kind of
partisan
does
issue.
the root cause analysis. Yeah, no, September, like UN Secretary General Guterres said, September 11 did not fall out of the blue sky. And Putin did not wake up one sunny Friday afternoon and said, I will invade Ukraine. Yeah.
That's
If
right.
you leave out the context, yeah, of 75 years of occupation in Israel, for example, or the whole putsch in Maidan, or 10,000 dead people killed by the Ukrainians, etc., etc. That makes it very difficult. But you, and correct me if I'm wrong, so from the interviews and from the books and the articles that I saw, you have a quite lucid view on both conflicts. So I'm coming back to you now. In your, as far as you can tell, how is it possible for other people to be so clear here and so flawed there? How does that work?
It's all just social psychology, man. You know, I studied it for one semester in junior college in 1996, so I know that that's the center of everything for everyone in the whole world. What will my people think about what they think I think? And if they're not going to like it, then I'm not going to think it. And that's just how it goes. Right now, the wokest leftists are pro Palestine. So that means that right wingers who hate wokest leftists are reinforced in their Zionism more than ever before. The same people who want to cut their son's little pecker off and turn him into a girl are saying that we must oppose Israel.
So where
So
is
they're
Mark?
saying no.
Where is Mark in this spectrum here?
Well,
Mark
Mark is,
Dubowitz.
well,
I mean, he's a
he's
smart guy.
Mark,
He's a
Mark
smart guy.
Dubowitz.
Yeah.
You have to understand, he's not a human man. He's a corporate mascot, right? He's
Mm.
a state government representative, right? He's like a public relations man. He's on the clock. He doesn't speak, human words. He's on a mission.
Yeah.
He
You
has a
clearly like him.
job.
Yeah, I see.
That's right,
You
to
clearly
push
like
these
him.
things. So, yeah, I'm sure he's horrible on Ukraine too, unless he thinks it'll hurt him with some Republicans he's trying to suck up to be extra horrible on Israel with him, in which case he would tone down his horribleness on Ukraine and turn up his horribleness on Israel because for him it's just business. But like overall in the country, Ukraine was Biden's war. So if you're a Republican, it's not like, in fact, the polls show Republicans consider Russia to be an adversary, if not an enemy, by super duper majorities, right? Like better than 80%. They're still not over the old Cold War. They don't know nothing about it, but they just know that this was Biden's thing that he did. And then on Israel, you listen to him on Palestine and they'll go, well, Joe Biden wasn't very kind to Israel. It's like, you idiots. You actually don't know anything. Joe Biden gave them all the money they needed and all the weapons they needed to kill every single person who died through January 20 of 2025 for his entire career since 1973. Every single Palestinian death is on Joe Biden. All of them. They go, whoa. I saw a headline once that said that he held up delivery of 2,000-pound bombs for one day and then delivered them anyway. Wham, wham, wham. So it's a conservative, Republican, patriotic thing to murder Palestinians and support Israel. Not like that hippie, commie, pro-Palestinian, anti-Semite Joe Biden. That's what these idiots tell themselves. That's how easy it is to get a conservative to be dumb and wrong on this, is get them to believe that the Democrats are good on it. And they will then embrace evil. They will purely embrace evil. Killing children all day. Hey, if leftists are against it, I'm for it. Oh, Jeffrey Epstein had like an industrial scale child rape machine that was all built to compromise powerful American politicians and businessmen for Israel. And they go, oh, rage against Jeffrey Epstein. But at least all that child molestation was for a good cause. At least it was for good old Israel, whose interests and ours are exactly the same, even when their interests necessitate the large-scale raping of American children to compromise and blackmail our politicians. Well, it says in the Bible, I got to do whatever Israel says. I'm sure you saw the interview with Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson, where Tucker Carlson's, what in the world are you talking about? And Ted Cruz says, well, that's what my Sunday school teacher told me. Yeah, some lady,
Hmm.
when Ted Cruz was 7, said that Americans must all be enslaved to Israel. And then he told Tucker Carlson, that's why I ran for the Senate, so I could put you in the service of Israel. Because that's what my Sunday school teacher told me. whose IQ couldn't possibly have been better than 110, who was only smarter than Ted Cruz because he was 7 and she was a grown-up, but who actually was just some idiot lady who doesn't know the first thing about Jesus Christ's intentions for North American foreign policy in the 21st century to support an Israeli state that was founded by communist, terrorist, atheist murderers who despise God and don't even believe in God, except that, oh, he said that we can murder these people and steal their property. Give me a break. It's so completely stupid. But all those people that go to Ted Cruz's same church, what did they think about what the others would think about them if they changed their mind? And so, never mind the Sermon on the Mount. Sunday school teacher says we have to serve Israel. And that is the true mandate of heaven. Send your boy to join the Marines. There's some Shiites need killing. It's completely stupid and crazy. It really is. On the other hand, though, there's a huge crack up coming because all of these things are just completely absurd. Support Al-Qaeda against Hezbollah? That's absurd.
In Syria.
Force Jesus to come back so you get raptured up to heaven in your body, which they promised 25 years ago at the millennium. Get it? Millennium, Middle East. It's just like the Bible. We have to support this war and it'll be the second coming of Jesus. Except that never happened. So your minister is either a liar or a goddamned fool to tell you that that was what was going to happen, that you had to support war, mass killing, launching a war, starting a war in order to fulfill your religious faith. But then all of their magic wishes never came true. All their promises never came true. So now where does that leave us when we have more terrorism, not less? When they got us fighting on the side of our enemies against their enemies, when all of their magical promises about how our religion mandates that we serve their interests, and if we do, then we'll get all these magical prizes. When those things never come true, what's left to believe in? They don't even have any oil. Now, maybe after they're done exterminating every last Palestinian, they can steal the natural gas off of Gaza's coast. But whatever, man. Hydrocarbons are fungible anyway. They could sell that oil to anybody. It would decrease, or sell that gas to anyone. It would decrease the price of natural gas across the world anyway. We could buy it from anyone. We don't need Israel at all. They need us. We're their best ally. They do nothing for us except cost us in blood and treasure. Look at the people who were killed in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, out there partying, celebrating the new year. And some lunatic with a pickup truck comes driving straight down the street, killed 12 of them, injured dozens more. And it was only lucky that when he finally crashed into some construction equipment, there happened to be a group of cops standing right there, so that when he got out of his truck, they just blew him away. Thank God. But he was armed. He had a rifle in his hands. He could have started massacring many more people after he had already mowed them down in his truck. And of course, they're covering it up. I don't know for sure, but I'm willing to speculate and bet you dollars to dimes, or dimes to dollars, that, yeah, dollars to your dimes, that he was mad about Gaza. This guy was an American Army veteran who switched to Islam and declared his loyalty to the Islamic State, or ISIS, and went and murdered all these innocent Americans, not policymakers in Washington, innocent Americans partying on New Year's. And they won't release the transcripts, but we know why. Because it's all about Israel slaughtering helpless little Palestinian babies. So those Louisianians were crucified for Israel's sins. And they didn't volunteer for that. They had to be lied into supporting any of these policies, that all of which are clearly to the detriment of their national interests.
Let me respond to that. I interviewed Professor Nurit Pelet El-Hanan. She's the sister of Miko Pelet. Her father, just for the viewers, I know you know, her father was a general in the 67 war, and her grandfather was one of the co-signatories of the Israeli Charter of Independence. So it's not the first best family. So she studied racism in Israeli school books, and I have an interview with her. It's called Pornography of Evil. That's her words. So she says there's a pornography of evil in Israeli school books. What I want to say with this is Israelis are, and I'm explaining, not justifying. So Israeli kids are indoctrinated right after kindergarten, and then coming back to Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, because he told me the Israeli army is using religious texts to further indoctrinate their soldiers in order to kind of enable them spiritually to do what they do in Gaza today. So again, I'm not justifying what they're doing. As a behavior analyst, I question that most people who grew up in that type of environment from kindergarten on, basically being indoctrinated in a certain way, it's very hard to get out. Again, I'm explaining, not justifying. In
No,
my point of view, you're completely right. So I view any kind of human-made religion as population control. This is what it was, yeah, or still is. I don't think it's a coincidence in America that you have to. I mean, I'm old enough to have noticed this kind of resurrection of the Christian faith in public life in America. This is now, I would say, 10, 15 years ago. When I was really young, when I was 20 or so, you haven't heard anything about religion in American movies, for example. Now, the last couple, let's say 10 years, it comes
it's
back,
in reaction
in
to that,
subtle.
right? It's in reaction to the atheism of the modern liberal state that you have people getting more religious. And this happens every 20 years. We have some kind of tent revival type thing in America every 20 or 40 years or so. This country was founded by religious zealots that were kicked out of Europe, kicked out of the Netherlands because they wouldn't leave anybody else alone, right? Like that
New
was how they
York,
got.
New York,
So
exactly.
we have a lot of that. We have a lot of that. And look, I'm sorry, because I do get cranky and I don't mean to be insulting to people's faith. People take this stuff very seriously. They care very much about the afterlife and seeing their loved ones again and all of these kinds of things. But it's just, I have very little patience for absurdity. And from the time I was a little kid, I was told, well, that's why you have to have faith. You have to believe it because you can't know it's true. There is no argument for it that makes any sense. That's why you just got to believe real hard. And to me, that just sounds stupid, right? If you told me that about any other thing, I would tell you to leave me alone. So I don't make exceptions for all this magic stuff. You know what I mean? Like somehow after I'm dead, then I'm going to live forever. No, dude, that's not how it works. After you're dead, you're dead. That's how it works. Okay? Give me a break.
Scott, on that note, you were, first of all, I could go on and on, yeah. So, but you were very generous with your time. But before we end, is there any topic, there's probably more than one, but is there any specific topic that's really close to your heart that we did not scratch on?
Um, yeah, I don't
Maybe,
know.
maybe we should mention your last book, the book that I actually wanted you to interview for, which is Provoked, and
Some other time.
maybe exactly that would be
Yeah.
my request because it's really worth it. It's really
Yeah.
worth it. Yeah. Also
So
to
my
read.
last
So
two
book.
Yeah, my last two books are Enough Already and Provoked. The first one is about Afghanistan. It's called Fool's Errand. So if anybody's interested in that, I know that war's over now, but especially for guys who fought in it, maybe. I got an email from a guy the other day who said he fought there in Sanjin down in the Helmand province in 2011, and he couldn't wait to read the book and find out, more about the broader story there. So that's Fool's Errand. But then the one after that is Enough Already. That's about all of the terror wars throughout the Middle East. And then the latest is Provoked, how Washington started the new Cold War with Russia and the catastrophe in Ukraine. It's got 7,000 citations, 700 pages long, full of everything that George Bush, Bill Clinton, W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump's administration, and Joe Biden did to cause the horrific conflict in Ukraine and all of that, the background of that. And both of them are really history books that go back, 40, 50 years and take you, give you a walk through. Um, and then I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute. You can find that at libertarianinstitute.org. And I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com. So you read all our great stuff every day there if you want to keep up on all this great stuff, all this terrible stuff. Dave DeCamp is our news editor there, does a really great job. And then I got my own show. I have two shows, actually. The Scott Horton show is my interview show. I got 6,000 interviews going back to 2003. And I just started a brand new show with Daryl Cooper called Provoked. That's actually right now the number one new podcast on Apple, and it's doing real good. And we have our latest episode comes out tonight on Friday. So
When
that
do
should
you
be good.
sleep? When do you sleep?
I I don't get much sleep. These bags under my eyes 20 years early here. This is my too much work to do, not enough time to sleep thing.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean that's basically my deal. And again, I apologize. I should probably
No
I don't
need.
know how you feel about
No
this.
need.
I should probably ask you to delete out some of the more horrible stuff I said at the end
I
there.
won't. I
I won't
won't. I
do
can
that.
tell you right now. No, 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 they don't. You're just a very outspoken and also emotionally engaged person about those very grave topics. And I think that's a credit to you. It's not a detractor, right?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I mean, I try very hard to pick on people's politics and leave their religious faith alone because I know that's my opinion is such a minority report and people just don't want to hear that stuff. But at the same time, it's like I don't know, like as we were talking about, that's a big part of what this is about, right? Is that as Bill Moyer said, the delusional are no longer marginal. You have people who believe these ridiculous things and they're calling shots. And so, you could really have massive and incredibly important policies, history determining policies could be created in a total absence of reason, right? We're like, it doesn't matter all of these rational objections because we're going to make the magic prophecy come true. And you can't turn your country over to people that delusional. And you got to do what you can to try to break that sort of consensus where you have one, you know?
Last question. Last question. Do you believe that they themselves, I mean, our leader, who shall I say, Hexet, who's the guy with all the tattoos? That's Hexet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Do you believe that they really believe that stuff that they're saying? Do you
Man, I
think
don't
they themselves are delusional or are they using it for their
Well,
for
I don't
their
know, man. I mean, Pete Hegseth, that's an interesting point because, he has claimed to be one of these guys in the past. Um, he seemed to have backed down from some of his worst pro-war stuff. And like, he had this group, I can't remember what it was called, but it was funded by Sheldon Adelson, and it was all about keeping us in the Iraq War. But then he went from there and joined up with Defense Priorities, which is the Koch brothers and Daniel Davis and Stephen Wertheim, and some good anti-interventionists are there. So there's reason to believe that he got more rational on foreign policy as far as that goes. But then all that can go right out the window again if he's relying on his Sunday school teacher to tell us what our foreign policy should be in the Middle East, or particularly on Israel and Palestine. Um, I mean, look, Ted Cruz was sincere when he said that to Tucker Carlson. But Tucker, my Sunday school teacher told me, this is how he really thinks about these issues. And so I don't know that about Pete
but
Hegseth.
that
If
that
he's,
Cruz is
if he,
also the guy who has no clue about Iran. That's the I mean, this is the thing that I took away from that interview with Tucker Carlson, yeah. Ted Cruz had no clue. He's clueless. They're
no,
bombing a country, they're virtually bombing a country with the potential of a wider war, maybe even involving Russia, and are clueless about the country. This is the one thing that I took away. I mean, even Tucker Carlson, and I'm not a fan, yeah, but he was like, "What? You have no
yeah, I mean, and he goes, because see, the one that got all the attention was he said, how many people live there? And Cruz had
yeah,
no idea. And I didn't know the number, but I could have answered by saying, well, I know it's like 3 or 4 times the population of Iraq. And that was what, 25 million? So it's about 100 million people. But Ted couldn't even have told you that, right? He couldn't have even guessed at all. And then on top of that, and better and worse, was Tucker said, well, what's the ethnic makeup of the country?
exactly. They're not
And he goes,
Arabs."
well, I know there's like Persian Shiites. Like, yeah, and that's all you know, huh? You don't know anything about it at
Yeah,
all.
yeah,
You're gonna overthrow the government there, but you can't
yeah.
begin to say. And this is I heard with the Israel lobbyist type lady on the Pierce Morgan show, where she's just like, oh no, it was they put us on hold and they brought in Nancy Mace, the congresswoman, and she goes, yeah, well, the regime change, we'll just have to overthrow the government there and then let the people of Iran rise up and figure it out. And it's like, no, you're just going to cause a civil war, is all you're going to do. You got Sunni Arabs, you got Azeris, you got Baluchs, and that's just scratching the surface. I don't know much more than that, but I know that there are all
60%
kind of people,
Persians.
yeah, all
60%
kinds of people who
Persians.
would love to seize power there and would love to prevent the other guys from being able to.
Including the son of Shah Islam Pahlavi,
Yeah. who they're championing. The
It's
Israelis were openly championing restoring the monarchy
Of
there.
course,
Of all
of
things.
course, of course. Reinstalling one of the most repressive regimes on this planet. Yeah, people have no clue. Yeah. Anyway, a
Yep.
point for another discussion. Yeah,
Yep.
Scott, really enjoyed our conversation, and I mean it. I will come back to you for Provoked. Yeah,
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
likewise. Thank you.